Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tech Talks with Santosh. And today we have two really special guests, and we will be talking about micro-frontends. So last week, Lars came up with an idea, why not to have actually an episode on micro-frontends, and Natalia reached out to him. So I said, yes, let's do it. We were supposed to actually do it on end of the March, but somehow the guest who was supposed to be here, he got sick. Hope he gets better soon, and he can join us in future. So we decided to actually have an episode of on micro front ends today, and we got few really good questions on Twitter as well. So we will discuss those as well, those questions, and as well as whatever we get in the chat. So be ready with all the questions you have, and let's give the chance to actually introduce Natalia and Lars. So Natalia, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Well, my name is Natalia, and I work in the role of solutions architect at NetCentric at the moment. I do a lot of systems design, and when it comes to web platforms like large enterprise projects. So I've seen quite a lot of microservices and micro frontends, and hopefully I have some experiences to share with everyone. Lars, the mic to you.
Yeah, I do a bunch of stuff. In my job, I'm a front-end architect, working with some big organizations. And so I know the needs of big corporations, but I don't necessarily think that all of them need micro front ends. But that's something we can discuss.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
Awesome. So yeah. So by the way, just to let you know this, we just completed 30 episodes last week, and we still have 8 more to go. Let's see. Let's hope I can complete 50. So finger crossed. So yeah, just wanted to let you. And thanks a lot for all the support you guys have given, and so which actually motivates me to come every week and actually come up with a new topic and talk about it. So thanks a lot again. Yeah, so let's talk. Let's go ahead and talk about first what is micro frontend. So who wants to go first?
Lars, go first.
Yeah, it's about definitions. Like if you're a
Mm-hmm.
purist, you'll say that a micro front end it can be developed, built, and deployed independently.
Mm-hmm.
It should even be able to be loaded into your application without refreshing the browser. That's the purest form of a micro frontend, and it's about, of course, combining multiple of these micro frontends into a single cohesive application on the web.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that you can do a more of a softer version of a micro front end by focusing on the needs, like what's the benefit of this. And the benefits are you can work in isolation, and maybe you can't deploy it independently, but you can test it and build it independently and test it in integration. So I would say that's sort of a micro front end, and something that could be beneficial to larger corporations with many teams working on the same application.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great definition, and I think I've been talking about micro frontends a lot, and that may give people the impression that I am like completely pro micro frontends, and that's not necessarily the case. I think like with every architectural definition, you need to back it up with real problems that you are going to solve, and sometimes or a lot of the times I see that some organizations try to solve problems that are more on the team side, on the governance side of the project or platform, with a technical solution like micro frontends, and it doesn't necessarily fit, or is not in 100% of the cases the right solution. And we, as architects, I think that we have to deal a lot with the hype that there is sometimes online, and the buzzwords that appear in tech news, because a new technology is out, because a new pattern is out, or an architectural solution. And yes, that's the real benefit to our clients, is to let us a little bit decide if from a technical perspective this is the best decision, which is not always the case, right?
Yeah, that's agreed. I mean, people go with hyperword. I remember when actually microservices came in, everyone like, okay, let's convert our services to microservices. And after a few years, they realized, okay, we never needed it. So let's convert it back to monolith. I was like, okay, so yeah, agreed. So that's what happens in industry, right? So whenever there is a new thing, people just jump into it, start doing it, and this is where our next question comes in. Do we really need micro frontends?
That's a question that it's only possible to answer if you see the use case in isolation and you can analyze it. And so it's not a Swiss knife in any way. It may be the right solution for some cases, and completely the opposite for some others. Lars, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think you mentioned something interesting, Santosh. You mentioned microservices, and they are definitely not dead yet. On the quite the opposite. I think more and more companies are embracing them. But similar to micro frontends, I don't think everyone needs them, but they do it anyway because it's the buzzword and it's exciting new technology, and it's serverless and Kubernetes and scalability and whatnot. But yeah, everything's jumping on that train, and yeah, it's speeding up, getting more and more popular, and we'll see the same with micro frontends probably. But it doesn't hurt us to stop and think, like, what problem are we trying to solve? I joined a company and they had already decided they wanted to do microservices. And like one of the, I was trying to ask them, like, why do you want microservices? And it was like you said, they had a monolith, a desktop application in the same code base as the server and everything. And they had seen the trouble that the teams were unable to work in isolation, so they were like breaking things for each other, and that was not very nice. But that's not a problem. Like, don't throw technology at that. That's not the best solution necessarily. Like, it's more about architecture and principles, and sticking to architectural decisions and principles. And tooling is even more important. Like, they would have probably benefited more from a monorepo. They decided to go with multi-repo microservice solution, and that was kind of a pain because, of course, you need some shared libraries, and as soon as you have them, then you go and update a version of the shared library, and you can't test it with all the microservices. Then you have to go update it in all the microservices, and something didn't work, so you have to create another patch for the shared library and back and update all the different microservices. And I think you'll find that you can have sort of the same issues with micro front ends, but I would say something like a monorepo and good tooling is even more important, and that's what you should be considering first, because that will allow you to structure a very large scale applications and projects without necessarily having to have a true pure micro front end with all of that individual deployment. You might not need that. That's not the first step we should be taking.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen many clients approach with the idea that they want microservices and micro frontends, but when you start analyzing their code bases, what you see is they have a lot of loading in their monoliths because, well, it grew out of control, mostly out of a lack of determination of what is a common dependency, what is something that should be abstracted, an interface that should be put in a different layer or level, and what are actual components. So when you start cleaning up and you start reducing the amount of components or modules that they have, and you start like decoupling a bit those common dependencies, it already starts looking a lot better, and you realize that you benefit a lot more in this context from, like Lars says, from a monorepo, especially when it comes to the tooling, to the build systems, and to the release models and everything that comes together with that. Because if you don't have teams or a team structure that supports this split, it's never going to work. And
Mhm.
once you have this split of teams, independent teams, where they're independent decisions and independent release cycles, you also need this governance, which many projects fail to have in order to coordinate all these integrations. And yeah, it should start at a very high level, right? By achieving this kind of mindset and also team organization for the technical solution then to work. And this is how we should approach microsystems in this regards.
That's awesome. So because this was supposed to be our next question, architectural decisions, and we already discussed about it. So do you have anything else or extra to add in the architectural decisions before we go with micro front ends? So
You don't necessarily need micro frontends, even if you have microservices. The domains might not match up. An area of your application might need one or more of these microservices. So it's not a one-to-one relationship necessarily. If that's the case, maybe it makes more sense. But it doesn't mean, like, having microservices does not mean that you have to have micro frontends. And that's where some people will go wrong with assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also an important point. Both the microservice and the micro frontend need to map to a single business capability. I always say this because if we have like a set of base components, let's suppose we are working on a web context and we have some components that are found everywhere, typically in this context, like some text and image or a teaser or a stage, or these components that form the very foundation of every website. If you have a microservice and a micro frontend for each one of them, it doesn't make any sense because they're going to be consuming from the same kind of dependencies, and it would be much more efficient to have them all together bundled. So this is when you have to think, okay, maybe if I have capability that is, I don't know, developed and maintained by a third party or by a team that is completely independent, could be search capability, it could be a authentication and authorization capability. This is something that you may want to delegate to a very independent team. But yes, again, with governance in mind.
So let's take a question from Nacho. So his question is, what would be the perfect scenario where micro front ends are the right answer? So you already mentioned few, but in case you want to add few.
Lars, go ahead.
It would be a very large system with cohesion. Like, think Microsoft with all these different services and you navigate between them. Think Google. So if you're not Google or Microsoft, think again. You might not need them. Well, it can be a good fit, but you should definitely keep in mind that the tooling and architectural decisions we already discussed in the tooling. We will be discussing, like, how can you do micro front ends, because microservices are getting old, so the tooling and the infrastructure has become better. So something like serverless makes microservices more convenient, a lot more convenient. But the tooling for micro front ends is not that mature yet. So I think it's still, the next section is about tooling, but I think we're still at the point where making micro front ends makes a lot of things more complicated, right?
Yep.
So there's a big trade-off just picking micro front ends. Now you have a big, more complicated setup, and it's not something new. We have been doing micro front ends or some flavor of that for many years. The web is a very dynamic thing in itself. But
100%.
our applications are becoming bigger and bigger on the client side. So now we're trying to solve it by new tools that will allow that.
Yep. You want to add anything, Natalia?
I want to add that you also need to have a good strategy in terms of APIs and an event-based, probably connection and communication between components. So the orchestration that Lars is talking about, and the tools that are not so mature to allow us to do that. So you have to get creative. The most important thing is that you need to make sure that the UX or the experience for the user is very, very coherent. If you're going to have micro pieces, like I call them, stitched together in a non-seamless way, does it really make sense? I guess not, right?
Franken front end.
Yeah, totally.
Good. So let's take some questions which we received from Twitter. So Umair has few questions, and then we can go to tooling, because the next question which we have is related to tooling. So how do micro frontends help enterprise improve their productivity? Question for both of us, for both of you. You have been doing architecture for a long time.
Yeah. So this is about being able to work as a team in isolation and deploying it without affecting others or without having to consider how you will be affecting others. So if you have independent deployability, then you can have more confidence that you're not breaking, and you don't have to coordinate the deployment and the changes with other teams. On the other hand, when you have a bunch of microservices and if there are places where they interact, it can become more complicated. And as Natalia said, you have to be really careful about the APIs, the public APIs of your micro frontends and their boundaries to the other parts of the system.
Yeah, I also have a point to make about that. When we think about independent deployability and the very attractive idea of making changes and deploying them somewhere in some other origin, and they're going to automatically be there in your production system. Is this something we really want? Because in general, we want to, take our time to test and to make sure that everything works. And when we are not or don't have the chance to test that in a stage and then deploy it to production, but it's going to appear right away in production. Do we do this? I don't think this is a real optimal way of doing things, and it's completely opposed to all the best practices that we have been enforcing for so many years. So we have to be really clear. Of course, you can test in isolation, but then you're going to finally deploy it to production. And then if you have this kind of cycle where you deploy to a stage and you test it, and then you deploy it to production and you test it, are you that independent in the end? So will you really do that? Just change things and deploy it immediately so it's consumed by a production environment? I think that's a little bit unrealistic and never really happens in this way. Yeah. So we have to really think about it.
Well, I have to say that I work for a company that's all about continuous delivery, continuous deployment. So we're actually deploying on commit for some of our projects and trying to do that for my open source projects as well. Like doing that can give you some better development habits. Like you will think twice before you merge to the main branch. So you will be more careful and you will learn what to do and what not to do. And you will make mistakes, but in the end, you'll be a lot more happier because you don't have to do this whole deploy to testing, deploy to staging, manual testing, change approval boards, and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, and it's the ideal thing, but like we said before, it requires also a lot of training and a lot of coordination, and also some maturity on the side of the team as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I can trust Lars might be doing it, because the way he writes test cases, I have seen that in Lumberjack as well. So there are like hardly some chances that something might go wrong.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of chances that something may go wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So but let's take this the another question from Umair as well. So what are the common challenges faced by corporates while implementing micro frontends? Good question.
Corporations, I would say more enterprises. There is a misalignment between that wish for independence and the usual, how would I say, not bureaucracy, but we know that there is a process behind everything we do at that level. So this is where there is a mismatch. We want everything super fast, but these kind of large enterprises hardly ever work with that kind of agility, and this is where the challenge is faced.
What about you, Lars? So, do you have anything?
Yeah, so this is about what you want as a company, and maybe you don't feel agile, you don't feel that you can move very fast or change things very fast, so you might reach for micro front ends. But then you will soon discover that it's not the technology, it's the company and the company culture. And there's this saying about structuring a system, and it'll end up being structured like the organization who created it, right? And no matter the technology, you'll end up like being roadblocked by the processes that are already in place and trying to change those too fast. Like you can't just throw agile tooling or agile methodologies at an waterfall company and expect it to change overnight. So you'll be discovering something like this, that your processes and your internal dependencies and how you coordinate with other teams and the rest of the business, all that will be in the way before you can succeed with micro frontends.
Exactly. So if you apply technology before you apply those changes at a strategical level or business level, then it's not going to work.
Agreed. Good. So let's move on to our next question, and then we'll be back to discuss about a few other questions which we have. So the next question is, of course, about tooling. So what are the tools which we can use to build micro frontends? I think there are a lot of people who are interested into this question.
That has a very broad answer. Lars, if you want to go ahead.
So there's this framework called MicroSpa, I think it's called, and it supports React, Angular, and Vue out of the box, and you can hook in other frameworks if you want. And that is actually seems pretty well structured and documented. So big, huge respect for that project. That's something you could look into. And some of the bigger companies have released their open source versions of their own tooling, but then you're more into a mix and match situation where you have to put pieces together to get a micro front end framework for your applications. Yeah, and there's one called something with an F, like is it Finker or something? Flinter, something like that. There's a framework specifically for micro front ends. It's also open source, I think. Sadly, I can't remember the name right now. And of course, there's older technologies that I'm sure you'll mention, Natalia.
No, I think, yeah, again, the tooling is very, very requirement dependent, right? But what I would like to also bring on top of the table is that you will have yet another dependency, right? If you use like micro SPA it's great, but it's just another framework you have to maintain, right? And those are the considerations one has to keep in mind. And then you have to have a team, which is also very important, that is in charge of that, host, of that shell where everything else goes together and is put together. Yeah. And it has the responsibility of making sure everything can be or work seamlessly.
I think some of the bigger issues here might be how do you coordinate something like authentication and authorization and routing between all these applications?
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
Certainly where you could need some tooling for that.
Yeah, and state management, it's also one of the, let's say, challenges, especially when you have a mix of technologies. And I mentioned this in an article I wrote a couple of months ago. If you are going to go with a more agnostic approach, then it may even not suit well to the technology you are using, and it's never going to, or you're never going to leverage it to its full extent. So this is when the every team has technology decisions independence can also be challenged. Can they, or should we abide by some guidelines? Also, the versioning of dependencies can represent an issue. If we have several versions of Angular or React or Vue coexisting in a page, that means several initializations, several bootstraps taking place at the same time with the collisions that implies.
Yeah, this is actually a good point, and I think Umair had this as its third question in that tweet, which was how to prevent organization from like getting into chaotic messes and unorganized code bases. And for sure, like you don't have to use different technologies. Quite the contrary, if you can standardize on a set of frameworks and libraries, more or less, between the teams, you can have team members not how can I say that the team members will be able to move between the code bases, between the micro-frontends more easily. And it does happen that people join another team, and maybe that's even your strategy as a corporation, that you don't have micro-frontend teams, you have business teams that can work on either micro-frontend as needed. So in particular, in that case, it's important to be using the same technologies. And even if you were even able to share some of those dependencies on the global level for the whole application. Because another downside could be that you're loading 3 times the React runtime, 3 times the Angular runtime, and Vue, and so on. So that could be a performance hit for the overall application.
Absolutely.
Thanks for answering that question, Lars. So let's move on to the next question, which Umar has. So can monorepos help keep micro frontends organized? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think they can even be a great alternative to micro frontends as we think of them, because this is sometimes all a project needs, to move some dependencies, like we said, to a more kind of library level, and then have the projects nicely organized. And yeah, definitely.
What do you think, Lars?
For sure, I would reach for a monorepo a long time before I consider a micro frontend, because people will blame the tooling. They will say it's too slow to have everything in the same code base, and it's too difficult. But that's why you need tooling that kind of addresses those concerns, such as NX, for example, which will allow you to run smart computations so that you're only testing around the code that has changed. You're not testing the whole monorepo. At least you can opt into that, and you can even, to the point that you can even cache some of the tests and the builds for files that haven't changed, should they need to be run. And on top of that, like if you have a monorepo, now we talked about this, right, Santosh? We had an episode about monorepos.
Actually.
One of the issues there is how do you prevent people from using code that they're not supposed to use? This is another place where you need the tooling to set up those architectural boundaries, and NX has a nice developer experience for this this problem in particular. So another example of you need tooling to support and make this easier, and be able to set up rules so that you can get all the benefits and not the downsides of a monorepo.
Definitely.
Yes, Natalia, go ahead.
No,
I
I
think
just
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Lars. I was just agreeing with you.
Okay.
We forgot about an important tool for micro-frontends.
Mhm.
That's the iframe.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that was the question which I was supposed to show us next. So is micro frontends replacement for iframing live smaller application? And of course,
This is about encapsulation, right? I don't know. Some people see the iframe as a very old technology that should never be used again.
Mhm.
I disagree with that. I think iframe has its uses, and particularly when you are not very certain of the level of security of the code you are injecting in your in your project, it may be the wisest choice to encapsulate it completely and make sure that it does not have the ability to uh, you know execute things on your side. But it has, of course, its downsides when it comes to UI in terms of resizing. You can resize iframes. There are libraries for that, but it's another dependency, right? It's more code that you have to download, and then you also or it's not possible for you to design a strategy of utilization of commonalities like styles or fonts
Mhm.
because they're simply not accessible for
Hmm.
the iframe.
Yeah,
However, yeah, there
sorry.
are cases where they are I would say the recommendation. Yeah, Lars, please.
Yeah, I think it was Manesh in the chat. Mahesh, sorry, said
Mahesh,
something about security teams. Where was it? There was something about security teams hate iframes.
Vijay.
And
So Vijay says here.
oh, sorry, it was the wrong name I saw then. Security teams hate iframes, and that's true. But however, and yeah, you said it works in isolation, but there has been a lot of security exploit because they can access the parent window, the host application. But the iframe did get an upgrade a few years ago, the isolated mode,
Mm-hmm.
where you
Mhm.
can it's a bit similar to Dino, where you can say you have access to nothing, but I will tell you exactly what you can and cannot do.
Exactly. You need to
So
know the attributes, the right attributes to make sure that the iframe can only access what you want, right?
was it
But
called
if
isolated
you
or sandbox?
sandbox, yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, but if you're integrating micro frontends via web components, it's even worse in a sense. So in terms of security, I mean, so
Mhm.
this is another consideration to make.
That's right. That's another alternative that you can wrap your micro front end in a web component, and now you have the normal JavaScript API and you're sharing code, which means that it's executed in exactly the same environment without any security
Restriction.
boundaries between them.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is a way, and people are using this also when migrating to a new framework. They might start introducing the new framework through web components. Of course, that's a situation where they are themselves in control of everything, and uh, maybe they're not doing micro front ends at all. Maybe they're just migrating an app from one framework to the other and using the web component as a bridge between them.
Mhm. Good. So let's take another question. I think we also have similar question in chat. So which is the best way to build micro frontend? Is it the Webpack Federation module or SPA single page applications?
Mm. Well, those are very different mechanisms with different
Mhm.
purposes. My observation is that SPA should be used as a single page application entirely. Like, if you're not going to integrate it via an iframe and you have
Mhm.
to place an SPA inside of your maybe larger context, let's say a page in
Mhm.
a content management system, you're going to have to be very creative in managing routing and resources from a a base perspective. So I think if you have a micro frontend that it's one single page application via hyperlink, it's loading in an entirely different URL, and that's a good way to do it. If you have to integrate it inside of your own application, maybe you go with a web component kind of version. And then module federation is just a way to integrate applications or micro applications that are deployed in a different origin, and then you can bring them over, and then you can share dependencies because it has a mechanism to share scope and define a certain set of rules. For example, we're going to be sharing Angular, and then the host, which is the runtime that is initialized first, it's going to, if it has it, share this dependency with the micro frontend that comes from a different origin. So for certain cases, it may be suitable, but it's not also very mature because it was released with Webpack 5, and that was in November. So I think that we still need to explore it more and see the pains that it may bring over the table as well, because it's not all going to be fine. And then again, if you don't have the dependencies in the share scope, it has the potential of also bringing all the dependencies together with and initializing them in your context. So it also needs some sort of governance in the end. Lars, what's your take on module federation?
I'm not a big fan of module federation. I think it's a very cool tool, but I think it's the same thing as micro frontends in general, that too many people are reaching for that tool without considering do they actually need it. It solves the issue of you could share dependencies. So if you have many Angular micro frontends, especially, that's a nice solution to share them in the global scope, kind of. It also solves the problem of independent deployability, except now you need separate hosts. So now you have more to manage server side as well. But the module federation will help on configuring all of that at runtime, and it does allow you to switch out an application without having to deploy everything. I'm not sure if it supports live reload, like if you deploy a new micro frontend or you need to hit that hard refresh.
Yeah. And we need to think that also when you're working at that scale, you have everything usually cached. So it's not as simple as, at an edge level or CDN level. So it's not as simple as I'm going to deploy in a remote origin and it's going to show in your application, because usually you're not consuming directly from the server or anywhere. You're just showing a cache version of your page.
Great. So let's take another question. So this question is from Jibin. Is it good for the long term to build micro frontends for small to medium size organizations? Suppose most of the devs are familiar with Angular, but only few devs should be familiar with or is familiar with React or Vue. In short, how do we maintain the different technologies that will scale? It's more, I think, more of Monorepos, which can help you, but you can add.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think small and medium-sized organizations most of them shouldn't need micro frontends in general. Monorepo is a more interesting tool for them to reach for, and looking at their internal developer culture and organization, that can help an organization a lot more than a micro frontend framework.
Yeah. Just put it this way. Let's imagine you are using an Angular monorepo, right? And then you have some services and you have some common code that you are only going to maintain once. And if you have a small team that that's the right way to go. Why would you want to have yet another application that is Vue and then have to recreate that service, and then you have another React, and then you have to recreate again that? This is when you have to really sit down and think, is this really going to be a solution or another problem in my...
Agreed. I think as Lars mentioned in the start, right? So if you are Microsoft or Google, you should look for the SPA. Otherwise, it's not the solution you are looking at. Cool. So let's take another question from chat. This is more about tooling. So how to build a CLI tool which can generate child apps and shell apps? Oh, so he wants to generate a CLI tool. Or Mahesh, he wants to know about any tool which exists.
Well, for Angular, you can use schematics to do that.
Yeah, to build it, of course. But do we need to? I mean, there are already few tools available, I'm sure. And probably we can discuss more about it. So what do you think, Lars? Which tool can help here?
So he is asking specifically how can we build or how to build a CLI tool. So he's not asking for existing ones.
Mhm.
Of course, that's the first question you should ask yourself. Do I have to build it myself or did someone else do it for me? If you want to do this, as Natalia mentioned, Angular schematics, I really enjoy the NX plugins more. They are already more mature than the Angular ones and easier to get into. You don't have to learn as much to do a simple thing. And they can do exactly the same thing, except they also support, they work with other tools than just Angular. And of course, there's more tooling out there for tools like this. Corbin Crutchley is maintaining, what's his tool called? I don't remember. Sadly, I don't remember.
Yeah, there are several code generators out there, and you just have to explore the best option for you.
Okay, Vimal has this question. What are the security challenges in using web components in Micro-Frontend?
Well, I think we mentioned one of the issues is encapsulation or lack thereof. Then obviously, if you're going to integrate third-party code and you don't have any way to quality gate it or don't know what's there and it's going to be executed for your users without any kind of policies, it's going to be a security issue, right? You don't know in the end what you're... But then again, we execute a lot of code. We don't really know too much. So this is part of what it is.
If you're in control of all the code bases that are being orchestrated together, there's no issue. But if you have anything from third party, it's WordPress all over again.
Exactly.
I think Jordan had some suggestion. I found that idea better for moving from C# desktop application where clients can build plugins. I think he's relating to the model federation, I think. So especially when you're offering platform as a service, it's easier than plugins. So I think he's referring to more into that thing. Okay, so when using some. Okay, so this is another question from Alexander. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but it sounds Alexander, right? So when using the sandbox mode in iframes, have you encountered any other security related issues?
When it's content authored by users or even authors, if you have an iframe, they can potentially put anything there, right? Even in sandbox mode, you don't know if they are redirecting your users to somewhere or having them share data that is potentially, so obviously there are security issues at many levels, not only technical levels. But yes, it's again, it demands that you know what you're having integrated in your code, in your platform, in your sites, and be tested, and potentially also pen tested, right?
Anything you want to add, Lars?
I'm not aware of anything in particular, but as with everything on the web, everything is an attack vector. So I'm sure there are some security exploits already.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take another question from, I think Alex is the one who shared this question on Twitter. So he asked some question. I think we already discussed about web components versus iframes, and he had question about shared state. So I think this is where I'm not sure if we already discussed if what can help here. So if you are sharing the state between multiple applications, because I don't know the answer. What do you think?
Lars, go ahead, because I have a very strong opinion on this.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I'll share it later.
Okay. Well, shared state. Well, if you're in control of all the code bases, it will be easier because then you can use the same technology. For example, we could use RxJS. We could use something like Akita. We could use Redux. All of them are supported across frameworks. But you couldn't share state using NGRX with a React app. That would be pretty difficult, right?
Yep.
So yeah, and you could even go like take the root element if they're not in an iframe, and you can emit custom events there and use that as an event bus. Or you could use, if you are using iframes, you could use the message bus, the post message function.
Yeah, my opinion is that, my unpopular opinion is that I think 100% of the state managers that are out there are way too much for most of the web applications that we work with on a daily basis. They introduce a lot of code, a lot of maintenance, and you can go for a simple solution that is going to be available for everyone, which is a simple store object, JavaScript object somewhere that you can access from everywhere because it's global. And of course, if you have a very, very reactive application with a lot of, user interaction, you may need something more complex. But I've seen people really complicate their lives by implementing something like Redux. Now Redux is a little bit less complex than it was before, but for applications that really didn't need so much. So that's my
Will also depend on how much shared state do you even have. A lot of applications will only share like user credentials, and you don't need a framework for that.
Exactly.
But if you have micro-frontends working from the same data, then you can have a benefit of sharing that data between the applications. So it depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, and you should consider also persisting state server side for some cases.
Okay, I think shared authentication. So do you think it can be achieved the same way if we have multiple micro-frontends, both requires some level of authentication? So any idea how we can actually resolve this issue?
With an API first pattern, you can, once you are authenticated, you're authenticated for everyone. Then again, you can save that in some global place where everyone is aware of or can subscribe to it, and then you are authenticated for every component if you do it right.
Yeah, I think again, if you were in control of all the whole code base, it's less of an issue. We have a use case where we need our application to be shipped inside of other applications. So now we need to figure out how to share authentication with the host applications that's in a separate code base that we don't know about.
Yeah.
Again, becomes a problem. Well, I think for real world examples, I think I can share some links later on. I can get help from Lars and Natalia for sure. So uh, I think this is it from the Twitter, and let's take some questions from chat. So Mahesh has one question. Any thoughts on multiple micro front ends within same page having different routing? Generally seeing less information about routing and app-to-app communication in many articles.
Yeah, routing is one of the biggest issues, I would say, particularly particularly in relation to the browser, right? Because the browser is what the user knows when they want to, I don't know, hit the back button. What's going to happen with the routes for every application when you go back to where you were before? This is where a more advanced state management system would be helpful. But nested routing is for sure one of the most difficult challenges.
Yep, agreed. So what do you think, Lars?
Well, the last person was asking about real world use cases or showcases. So one that everyone knows is something like the Facebook application. We're not using it as much anymore, but we know it anyways. That's built from many micro front ends. And another one is Amazon that you might know as well. Like the shopping cart is a micro front end, the checkout page is a micro front end, the article is a micro front end, all of that. So um, yeah, it was about routing, but the many of those pieces don't depend on routing and are not connected to routing. If there are dialogues and pop-ups, some dialogues and pop-ups make sense to connect to the URL route, but not everything makes sense in terms of that. Also, something like opening the sidebar and which sections of the navigation is open, that is usually not tied to the URL and routing as well. But yeah, you probably need the tooling again to solve if you really have the need to synchronize the routing between multiple active micro front ends on the same time. I think single SPA has this integration with the different frameworks.
I think Jordan has its thought on the state management. So he says 95% of the companies I have worked for has used state management wrong or complete overkill. True, Redux was only created because Facebook failed at state. Yeah, agreed.
Well,
So
I'm
yeah.
happy, Jordan, that you shared my opinion. I know many people do as well, but I mean, you must have had some experience in this front end world to get to that realization, I think. And this is again going back to the hype and the buzzwords and our desire to test innovation and to work with new technologies, and sometimes we just use because
Use
it's
it.
cool and not necessarily the right way to go.
Yeah. As you said, buzzword, right? So everyone just
Yeah.
hears about, oh my God, micro front ends, let's do it. Whether they need it or not, let's do it because it's a buzzword. Yeah, so there are a few questions which I
I
received.
think in 2017 it was the same with Redux, right?
Yeah,
Everybody
agreed.
wanted to implement Redux. Yeah. Okay.
So there was some question from Vijay. So his question is more on performance testing micro front end. Any idea how we can achieve it?
Keep the critical path in mind, just like you do with a regular application, right? Don't load anything that the user is not going to need immediately. So, and this is again about orchestration and about having a good strategy for asynchronous loading of anything that you don't necessarily need at load time of a page. And then you're going to keep your performance in check, at least from the downloading code perspective. Obviously, then there are so many other contributors to a very bad performance that are not even code, but more assets.
Last, you want to add anything here? on the
No, I
performance
think
part?
code splitting is
Mhm.
probably the thing you want to look at first.
Mm.
Oh, awesome. So I think that's it. We don't have any more questions. And in case you have, I think all the questions from Twitter as well. So that's it for the day. So in case you have any questions for Lars and Natalia, you can reach out to them on Twitter. I think I have the Twitter link in the description of this video. You can find the Twitter handle and probably shoot a DM and discuss more about it. But the next question is, do you want to promote something here? So Natalia, you want to go first?
Yeah, I want to promote one of my friends' applications. It's called
Mm-hmm.
Euler Dot, and it's an application for video streaming.
Uh-huh.
Her name is Diana Rodriguez, and I think everybody knows her from the community because she's very involved. And yes, if you, well, I don't know if you're joining tomorrow. I'll be speaking at NG Honduras, and we're going
Uh-huh.
to be streaming over Euler. That's what I wanted to promote.
Do you have any link? Can you share it?
It's Euler. Well, let me type it here. I think it's .app. Let me check it again.
Let me just try it
Yeah,
and
that's
then
right.
yeah, it works.
That's right.
So let me just share it. So this is the app. You can see. I think yeah, I know Diana because she is in our Slack as well. She is one of the GitHub stars. So I get a chance to speak to her as often. So she's joining Twitch, by the way. If you are not aware, so she just announced that she will be joining Twitch. She first mentioned Twilio, and then she says, "No, no, 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 it's not Twilio, it's Twitch." I was like, "Okay, okay, it happens." Cool. What about you, Lars? So, do you want to promote anything?
Yeah, I think you showed the link earlier. Let me paste it here again. This is a
Uh-huh.
project by Adam Simsek. He's like a genius when it comes to microfrontend. He has a ton of experience working in large
Mhm.
enterprise applications where they're using microfrontends for everything. And he built
Uh-huh.
this small proof of concept for how you can do
And
Angular microfrontends without separate tooling. So
that's awesome.
that's really exciting, and I have a huge amount of respect for Adam.
That's cool. I just came to know about this project today. Lars mentioned us in one of the chat group which we are part of. So it looks really great, I think. And this is open source. I'm sure if you are interested into micro frontends, go ahead and check out the project. Probably you can also help him in adding more features, probably testing it, and filing some good feature requests as well. So go ahead and check this out. Okay, cool. So, yep, that's it for the day. So, thanks a lot, Natalia and Lars, for joining us today. And because, of course, I mean, you reached out to me, and then we decided, okay, let's do it. And we decided to do it today because someone else was not available. Thanks a lot for reaching out. Otherwise, I would have been in a mess. I'm not sure where to reach out. So, thanks again for doing that.
Yeah, always happy to discuss things with you. Um, yeah, and Lars, of course. So thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for inviting us.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Okay, so
Thank you.
in case, so next week we are going to discuss about another topic, and that will be on Friday. But before that, it will be Thursday, and my second open source day. So we will be I'll be doing a live stream again at 3 p.m. IST. In case you're interested, it will be on GitHub. So I'll be talking about few features of GitHub. I already received and request to talk about SSH. So I'll add SSH and some of the workflows basically which you can control from Visual Studio Code. So I'll be talking about that as well. So 3 p.m. 30 minutes, it's called 30 minutes of GitHub. And on Friday, we have another guest. His name is William Juan, or yeah, it's Juan. So he'll be joining us and we'll talk about Angular animation. In case you search about Angular animation, he has one of the blog posts, which is really famous. Lars knows about it. And it's like, I would say, a Bible for Angular animation. It's very detailed, and so that's what gave the idea for this next episode, and we'll be talking about it. But it will be a little bit earlier. So generally we do at 10 p.m. But he's actually in another time zone, which is 1.5 hour before me, yeah, after me, sorry. So we'll be doing it at 8:30 p.m. IST, so 1.5 hours before our regular time. So see you there. So we'll talk about Angular animation, and in case you have any questions, feel free to just post it. I'll be sending out a tweet on Monday, so I can get some questions from the community. That's it for the day, and see you next week, next Friday. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
So Jordan.